Okay, so welcome back. This is part 5 in our series where we help you to understand the wonderful world of 3D computer graphics. I'm going to use this wonderful free piece of software called Blender. And it has some incredible professional features, and I strongly encourage you to look at the previous videos in this playlist where we show you how to download and set it up and talk about some of the basics. And in the last video, part 4, we actually started building a model. And I encourage you to take a look at that. We showed you basically maybe 4 tools you're going to be using over and over again to build 3D models. So I encourage you to take a look at that and don't just jump in and start downloading other people's models. It's really much more beneficial, I think, to actually build it yourself and pause the video and start Blender and try to do these things yourself instead of just watching the video and nodding and think it makes you an expert. You have to actually do these things. In this video, we're going to talk about a very, very important set of tools and techniques that you're desperately going to need if you're going to be building 3D models. And it may not be intuitively obvious that you need these tools and techniques, but they are crucial, and it involves selecting. Now, we talked in the previous video in this playlist about extruding and making loop cuts and beveling, and those are very crucial tools, but you can't use those tools to operate on your object until you have selected the parts of your object that you want them to operate on. And often that can be very, very challenging and frustrating if you don't know the tools and techniques to do that. So the tools are important, but learning how to select what you want those tools to operate on is extremely important, and we're going to talk about that in this video. Unfortunately, there's going to be a few keyboard shortcuts you're going to need. If you're like me, I use a lot of pieces of software, and I don't like keyboard shortcuts, but in Blender, there's so much functionality that you're going to need to remember some of them, and there's going to be some in this video that you're going to need. So I encourage you, pause the video, start up Blender, follow us, and try to do these things yourself. And when you learn a keyboard shortcut, start up Notepad or something and write it down. And if you learn a technique, write it down. That's how you learn. Don't just watch the video. So here we are in Blender, and we are in the what's called the default scene. We've got the default cube. And what we're going to do is we are going to figure out how to select faces and edges and vertices in edit mode. So if you look here up on the left, and you have to be very mindful of this mode selector up here, we are in object mode, which we talked about before, allows you to select individual objects, but it doesn't allow you to modify the faces and the vertices and the edges of that object. In order to do that, we're going to have to go into edit mode to select and modify the parts of that object. All right? So it's very important that you get into the habit of checking up here to see what mode you're in, either object or edit mode. What we want to do is we want to first get rid of this cube because we want to use a more complex sphere to help us to understand how to select. So I'm going to select that with my left mouse button, and then right click, and down the bottom we've got delete. Select delete, and we've deleted our cube. So as we said before, to add a sphere, we go to Add Mesh UV Sphere, and here we've got our UV sphere, and we're going to start selecting parts of that. So we're in object mode, we've selected it. Now we want to go into edit mode, select edit mode, and you can see we are selecting vertices. We're in the vertex selection mode. You can see up here with a dot. Here is the edge selection mode, and here is the face selection mode. So let's first start with face selection mode and talk about some of the ways that we can select individual faces, vertices, and edges. So the most basic one is to hit the A key to select all right? Or you can go up here, select all, and that selects everything of that object. It's kind of rare that you're going to use that, but just so you know, it's there. Now, to deselect that, what I do is I left click somewhere else in the scene and it deselects. There's a keyboard shortcut to deselect everything, but I'm just going to use the A key or the left click somewhere else to deselect. Now, the next most common thing you might expect is any piece of software on the planet, if you want to highlight or select something, you left click. And we're in edit mode with face selection, the same thing with Blender. I left click on a face and I've selected it. And I select somewhere else and it deselects it. So what if I select this, but I want to add to the selection? Well, if you recall from other software, generally the Shift key allows you to add to a selection. Same thing in Blender. Hit the Shift key, left click, left click, left click, left click, and I've now selected 5 faces. Previously, we showed about this statistics list, and this is going to be very important to help you debug and understand exactly what's going on with your object. And you can see here we've selected 5 faces. We should go over here. We see under faces, there's 5 faces out of 512 faces in this object that are selected. So this is going to be very helpful to let us understand exactly what's been selected, so we can not only understand what we've got, but also it's going to help us with debugging. So the Shift key helps us to add to a selection, but also it helps us subtract from a selection. So I can go Shift and left click, and I've subtracted that selection. Shift left click, Shift left click, Shift left click, and the Shift either adds or subtracts from a selection, okay? Very important. Now, there is another very useful tool that allows you to select a box, and that is to just over here somewhere, left click and drag, and it draws out a box, and everything visible in that box will be selected. So you can see it has selected everything in that box. However, if I left click and move around to the back, you can see nothing was selected in the rear. And that's because, as I said, it selects only what's visible. So let's say we want to select using that box, but we want to select this entire top, including in the back. Well, there is an extremely important tool that allows you to kind of see through this and select everything front and back. And if you go up here to the top right, you can see I've got here, if I hover over this, it says toggle X-ray. X-ray mode is extremely, extremely important for you to get familiar with. You're going to use it a lot. So I'm going to click on this, and you can see I'm in edit mode with faces selected. I'm in X-ray mode, and you can see, as we showed previously, we have each face, which is the center of that face has a dot, which is the selection point for that face. If I select that dot, it selects that face. All right? But here we're also seeing through the object, and we're seeing all the faces front and back. It's basically in X-ray mode. So if I want to do our drag select with the box, I can drag select with the box, and you can see it has selected all of the faces front and back. So X-ray mode is extremely, extremely important. You're going to use that a lot. But now you can see I've selected front and back, but it's not uniform. I've selected these down here. Maybe I only want this. That's where it's going to be extremely important as you get familiar with what we talked about here, which is these rotating axes, right? As we showed before, these axes show you the Z-axis is the blue up axis, the Y-axis is to the right, and it's yellow, and the X-axis goes front and back, all right? And as I middle mouse button and move the mouse, you can see I rotate around these axes. However, another extremely important tool that these provide is that if I deselect this and I go into the X and I highlight it, it turns white. That means I can go into what's called the orthogonal view, which means you're looking down the X-axis, a flat view where there's no what's called perspective distortion. It's just a flat view of the sphere down the X-axis, and I'm still in X-ray mode. So what I can do is I can drag the box And all of the dots for the faces that I want to select, if I've enclosed that in the box, it will select those front and back. So orthogonal is extremely important because it makes things a lot cleaner, right? It gives you a very clear XY view or ZY view of this sphere without all the confusion here. So orthogonal and X-ray are going to be very, very important for you to get very familiar with if you want to quickly select stuff in your object. Now, another thing we can use, I'm going to get out of X-ray mode, and that is what's called the circle select. Now, what do you think the circle select does? Well, we saw the box select draws a box. Well, the circle select should draw a circle, right? Well, no, it doesn't. Unfortunately, circle select is more like a brush select. And this is one of those tools where it's good to use the keyboard shortcut, which is a C. C as in Charles. So I'm going to hit the C key, and you can see I get this little circle, little dotted circle around my cursor, and that defines the selection circle. And I can scroll my mouse in and out to make that bigger and smaller. So it doesn't allow you to drag and draw a circle. It's more like it defines a brush, as with other graphic software. So circle is brush, and it's the C key. So I've got my brush, and I can left click and drag, and you can see I am selecting all of those faces. And I right click to get out of circle select mode. So C to circle select, right click to disable circle select. And again, since I'm out of X-ray mode, all I've done is selected the visible faces. If I want to circle select through the object, as we said before, go into X-ray mode, go into orthogonal, hit the C key, and then I can drag it across, and now I have selected through the object. So circle select or brush select is quite useful. So we've got the box select, we've got the circle select, and we've talked about orthogonal and X-ray mode. So now another technique that you're going to be using all the time, and it's extremely important that you get familiar with it, and you try it out a lot, and that is the loop select mode. So before we use the circle select to select this loop of faces, there's another way to do it, and that is loop selection. And again, this is a keyboard shortcut that you're going to need to use. Again, I'm in edit mode, and I've got face selection. And let's say I want to select this loop of faces like we did before. Well, I can go into loop selection, and to do that, I hit the Alt key and left click. If I'm in face selection mode, left click right here, and it will select that loop. Okay, so we select the edge of the face, and what it does, it selects the loop that's perpendicular to the edge. So the edge is up and down, and it selects the loop perpendicular or left to right. And then I can deselect. I can hit the Alt key here, deselect. Now what if I want to select this vertical group? Well, we said you hover over the edge and it will select the perpendicular. So we're going to want to hit Alt and go to this edge, and it will select that loop. All right. So extremely useful. We can do that, and we can do that, we can do that. What if we want to add? As we said before, hit the Shift key and Alt, and it will add and add. All right? So again, very basic keyboards, shortcuts, but you're going to need to learn them. So Alt and left click selects the perpendicular loop. Now, let's go up to the top here and try that Alt loop selection on this top group of faces. So we said here we can hit Alt and select this loop, and we've selected this loop, but let's say we want to select this loop. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hover over this, hit Alt, click on that. Wait a minute, that didn't work. Click on that. Something's wrong. It's not working with the Alt selection. And this brings up one of the key things that you're going to have to be understanding about building objects in 3D. And that is that triangles are evil. Now, you really, really need to understand that and get that burned into your brain, because one of the goals in 3D objects, for many reasons, is to try to avoid triangles. And you can see here, this top cap of the sphere is made up of triangles. You can see I've got one side, two sides, three sides. And each one of these has only three sides. They are triangles. And we just saw one of the reasons why triangles are evil is because some of the selection tools and methodology techniques don't work with triangles. So it's really important that you, especially starting out, try to make all of your objects comprised of four-sided polygons. Okay, you can see here I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Extremely, extremely important. Now there's ways around it, and there's times when triangles are okay, but you really need to get into the mindset of trying whenever possible to make quads, what are called four-sided polygons, or quads, quadrilateral polygons, okay? Very, very important. So to drive that home, I'm going to select all of these polygons. I'm going to go to face and go to triangulate faces, and that will make all of my beautiful quadrilateral or quad polygons into triangles. Now let's say I want to select this loop. I hit Alt, and doesn't work, all right? So you can get into some really bad problems with triangles. At the end of the day, under the hood, the software, when it does rendering, it converts everything to triangles anyway, but from a modeler's perspective, in building this thing, you really want to avoid them. So let's Control Z to undo that. Get rid of our triangles. So now another thing you're going to use is, let's say I have Alt clicked on this loop, and I want to increase the selection. I want to go make it larger selection. Well, there is another keyboard shortcut you're going to be using over and over again, and that is the Control+. And that will add to the selection. Now I can go up here and select more or less, and you can see more is Control numpad plus and less is Control numpad minus. So I'm going to select this, Control plus, 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 and then minus, minus, minus. This is going to be very, very useful. I encourage you to get familiar with it. So now let's say I want to invert this selection. So I can go up to Select, Invert, and it will select everything but. Now another technique we're going to use is, let's say I've got this sphere and I want to select the faces on the top. One thing that we're going to want to do, especially when we have some very complex geometry, very complex object, is we are going to want to hide stuff that is just in the way. So in other words, all of these faces, as you can see, I rotate, it gets kind of confusing, got all these faces, and maybe I just want to work on this top cap of faces. One thing you can do is you can temporarily hide the stuff that you're not interested in. So I'm in X-ray mode, in edit and face mode, and I want to drag select these faces. What I can do is I can hide them. It's temporary, it doesn't get rid of them, it just hides them from view. And to do that, as you might expect, it is the H key. And this is one you're really going to have to remember, because there's not a good menu item for H. You have to go into mesh, and it's kind of confusing. But just hit the H key, and you can see I've hidden temporarily everything that I'm not interested in. When you get complex objects, you're going to use this all the time. It's extremely important. So H to hide the selected faces. And then to unhide them, I just hit Alt-H, and it unhides them, but they're still selected. So it's like nothing happened. You know, it's the same thing. It's just H and then Alt-H. And you can do that temporarily and work on this without having to worry about, you know, you can work in X-ray mode and not have to worry about selecting anything you don't want. Really, really important that you get into that habit, because it's really easy when you start selecting, especially in X-ray mode. You start selecting and oh no, you selected stuff you weren't interested in. So focusing on the stuff that you're working on is really, really important. The other thing you're going to want to do is invert that selection. So we can say select, invert, and now you have selected just the ones that you want to work on. So now let's say I've got my sphere and I want to go into edit mode, face selection, and I want to select using Alt left click, select this loop, and I'm going to delete all those faces. So now you can see that I've got still got one object, it's my sphere object, but the top and bottom half aren't connected, or in Blender terminology, they're not linked. There is no physical connection between these two pieces. There's a very nice tool that I can use that will select each part separately, and that's called the linked selection. And so I can hover over this, hit L, and it selects all of the faces that are linked to whatever I was hovering over. So I was hovering over this face, and it selects all the linked faces. And I can go down here, do the same thing, hit L, and it selects all the linked faces. Especially when you build your object in multiple pieces that are disconnected, this can be really, really useful to select just a part of your object so that you can, apply materials or do whatever you want. But hitting the L key is really, really, really important. So now let's say we've got our sphere and I want to select some faces and I want to extrude them for whatever reason. So I can try my my circle or brush tool, and I'll select these 4 guys, and I'll go to the extrude button, select extrude, and extrude it out. So now we talked before about beveling, and we say, well, these are really sharp, and I want to bevel these sharp edges. There is a wonderful selection tool in Blender where I go up to select exactly what we want, which is sharp edges. And it selects sharp edges, and you can see down here it's got the little drop down, and you can define what is sharp. And this says 30 degrees is sharp. So I can bring it down and I can say it'll select everything because only 9 degrees. Or I can say it has to be like 90 degrees. So depending on what you want, you can select only those edges that you want to bevel or whatever. So now we can go to the bevel tool and we can pull that out, and you can see now we got a nice clean bevel. Now we talked about how triangles are evil, and as you get into modeling, you're going to be spending time trying to make sure that the topology, that the faces and vertices and edges of your object are really optimum and are nice and clean. And one way that can help you do that is Blender allows you to select faces depending on how many edges they have. So for example, if we wanted to just find all of the triangles, we can go up here to select all by trait, and we can select faces by sides, and it will allow us, using this drop down here, to say, okay, only select the faces with a number of vertices of 4. And we can drop that down to 3 if we only want to look for the triangles. So here it's selected all the triangles, faces with 5 sides. And you can see we've got some 5-sided faces here. And to make that even clearer, we can do the Shift H, and that will hide everything that's not selected. And that shows us exactly what the faces are, the 5 sides. So really nice way to debug your object to make sure, depending on the number of sides the faces have, to make sure if you only want 4-sided polygons, this will help you figure out what the polygons are in your object. Now one more thing that can help you, especially with complex objects, is let's say I've gone to a lot of trouble to select, say, these faces here, right? Maybe it's taken me a lot of time and I want to have that available, that selection available for the future for whatever reason. And if you've got a very complex object, you know, it might be something that you're going to want to deal with later. So how can I save that selection for use later? Well, there is a nice way to basically assign that selection to a name, and so that you can reselect it later. And that is using vertex groups. Fancy term, but really it's just a name for a bunch of vertices. So here's my object, and I can go into this down here on the right with these properties. I can go down to the triangle here, to the object data properties, and I click on it, and you can see it's got this thing called vertex groups. And all I have to do is hit the plus to add another vertex group, and I can rename it if I want, and I can call it selection. And all I have to do, if these faces are selected, I can just hit the assign button, and from now on with this scene, all I have to do is go to this vertex group called selection, and I can select it. So that selection is always there. And these vertex groups are useful in other ways, but that's one way that you can save that selection, especially if it's a very complex one that you're going to need to use later. Okay, so now I have a challenge. I've added to my scene a torus, add mesh torus. And I selected an edge loop around the outside of the torus. And as we used in our flashlight video where we built a flashlight, I used the checker deselect to select only every third face in this ring of faces. And I extruded every third face to come up with this weird looking thing. So my challenge is this. I want to select on these extensions that I extruded, I want to select these inside faces, okay? Like this face and this face and this face and this face. I don't want to select the top faces or the outside facing faces. I want the inner faces. So let's think of how we can approach that using the tools we learned about before. Well, one thing we learned about is get rid of the stuff that isn't important, right? Now, in this case, it turns out it's a very, very simple solution. We don't need to do this, but let me just show you. I can go into X-ray mode, and I'll go into edit mode with faces. And what I can do is I can get rid of this donut, all of these donut faces, because we're only concerned about these extensions. So how can I do that? Well, one way is we can use our circle select and kind of do the reverse. So I can hit C and I can select all of these outside faces of these extensions. I can go around and really quickly select those. And now I've got all those faces. I can use our Control plus to select the extension. So now only those extensions are selected. And I can do a hide, and here we've got a drop down that says hide selected. I want to hide unselected. So now the donut is hidden. All right. So now we've made it a little bit easier where we only have the remaining extensions. So now the problem is, how do I select just these faces? Well, this is one reason why it's really good to just try stuff and see what works. So we've got we're in edit mode with faces. I can go to the select menu and go down to select similar. And there's a whole bunch of ways that you can distinguish between the faces and select only those, for example, that have the same material or the same area. The dimensions are the same. Polygon sides, perimeter, normal, flat, smooth, face. So what we have to do first is select one of the faces that we want to match to the rest of them. So we can go to select, we can select similar, we can select similar material, we can go down here to the drop down and go to face map, nope. Flat, smooth, that selects all of them. Coplanar, nope, that only selects that one. Normal, nope. Perimeter, ooh, look at this. We have selected all with the same perimeter. And what perimeter means is if I add the length of this edge plus this edge plus this edge plus this edge on this face, that defines the total perimeter, the total length of all the edges. And as it turns out, you may not be aware of this, but the way we extruded that, these side faces happen to have exactly the same edge dimensions, but the top ones and the bottom ones don't have the same edge dimensions. All of the internal faces have the same edge dimensions. So just by going through and trying, we've found a very quick way to do that. And actually, I could unhide everything, and if I select this, select similar perimeter, and that one selection gave us exactly what we want. So that's why it's really important that you go through and try this yourself. Try an object, build an object, just make weird looking objects with a lot of complexity and figure out ways, just try things and see if you can find out ways to select that's really easy, and that will really help your understanding. Anyway, I hope all that helps. If you like any of these videos, please hit the like button, subscribe, hit the bell notifications. Most of all, please let others know that we're here so we get some views. Really appreciate it. Take care. Have a really good day. Thanks.